When my son struck me across the face that morning, I didn't shout. I didn't cry either. I simply stood there, my cheek stinging, my heart heavier than it had ever been in my 4 years. I picked up my old handbag from the chair, grabbed the few belongings I could reach, and walked out the back door like a ghost escaping her own home. Outside, I could already hear laughter drifting from the yard. My daughter-in-law, Tina, was setting up tables and pouring drinks for the guests arriving later that evening. She's finally gone. I heard her say with a cheerfulness that cut deep into my chest, "Now this house will finally feel like ours." They didn't notice the door creak open or the quiet footsteps slipping down the hallway. That moment would come later. Right now, my only goal was survival. My name is Eleanor Hart. I'm a retired seamstress from Greensboro, North Carolina. This morning, my only son, Mark, shoved me so hard against the kitchen counter that my head cracked against the tile wall. For a brief second, the world flashed white. I remember hearing my granddaughter, Lily, cry from the hallway. She's only 9. Her small voice trembled as she screamed, "Daddy, stop." She didn't understand why her father, the boy I had raised with love and sacrifice, was suddenly a stranger with eyes full of rage. I didn't let him see my tears. Pride can be a strange thing. It keeps you standing when everything else is broken. I straightened my back, brushed the dust off my dress, and walked toward my room without saying a word. Mark didn't follow. He was already outside with Tina, who was watering the plants, my plants, the ones I had nurtured for 20 years. I could still hear her laugh, bright and carefree, as if the world had just begun. Inside my small back room, I pulled an old canvas bag from the closet, the same one I had carried when I first came to the city as a young woman chasing a better life. Back then, it held hope. Now it held escape. I packed only what mattered: 2 blouses, a cardigan, a long skirt, my blood pressure pills, and the faded photograph of my late husband, Henry. He'd been gone 15 years now. Sometimes I think he was spared from seeing what our son has become. Before I closed the bag, I took the folder from the bottom drawer, the one containing the property deed, bills, and the will Henry and I wrote together. The house was legally mine, not Mark's, not Tina's. Mine. Something told me I would need those papers soon. Just as I zipped the bag, Lily slipped quietly into the room. Her eyes were red and swollen. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around my waist and began to cry. I stroked her hair, breathing in the smell of childhood, the only warmth left in that cold house. "Grandma, please don't go," she whispered. I forced a small smile. "I'm just going for a little trip, my love. I'll be back soon." But we both knew I was lying. Children always know. From the kitchen, Tina's laughter echoed again. "She's already packing. Finally, we can live how we want. A party." They were throwing a party to celebrate my absence. My hands trembled as I pulled the zipper shut. I kissed Lily's forehead. "Be brave, sweetheart. Everything will be all right someday." Then I walked through the living room, past the furniture Henry and I bought piece by piece, past the photo frames that no longer hung on the walls, past the life that no longer felt like mine, and stepped outside into the burning Carolina sun. The air was heavy, dry. My legs shook, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I crossed the street and saw my neighbor Brenda watering her garden. Her eyes widened when she saw the bag on my shoulder. "Eleanor, what happened?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came, just silence, and the sound of my heart breaking. Brenda didn't ask again. She just took one look at my trembling hands and led me through her front door like a mother guiding a child. Her home smelled of jasmine and lemon cleaner, the kind of comfort that used to fill mine before it turned into a battlefield. "Sit down," she said softly, guiding me to the worn sofa by the window. "I'll make you some tea." I sank into the cushions and stared out at the sunlight flickering through her curtains. Across the street, my house, was already coming alive with movement. Balloons were being tied to the mailbox. Music was playing. Tina's friends were arriving early, their cars filling the driveway where Henry's old truck used to sit. It felt surreal, watching strangers celebrate in the home I'd built with my own 2 hands. My throat tightened, and for a moment I thought I might scream, but I didn't. Years of silence had taught me that pain doesn't always need sound to exist. It grows in the quiet, feeding on everything you never say. Brenda returned with 2 mugs of tea, her eyes filled with concern. "You're shaking," she whispered, placing the cup in my hands. "I'm fine. I lied. The tea scalded my tongue, but it gave me something to focus on, something that wasn't the ache in my chest." "You're not fine," Brenda said. "I've seen the bruises before. I just didn't want to believe Mark was capable of that." Her words cut through me. I looked down at my wrist, where a faint purple mark was forming. "He wasn't always like this," I said, my voice barely audible. "When he was little, he used to bring me wildflowers from the backyard. He'd call them adventure flowers. Said they were proof he could survive the jungle behind the fence." Brenda gave a small smile. "Kids change when they grow up." "No," I whispered, "something changes them." The words hung heavy in the air. I knew when the shift began. After Henry's death, Mark withdrew into himself. He stopped coming to family dinners, stopped answering my calls. When he met Tina, I thought it was a blessing. Someone to fill the loneliness, but she was clever, ambitious, and quietly cruel. She made sure Mark believed every small mistake I made was deliberate. A broken dish became carelessness. A late bill became manipulation. Over the years, she turned him into a stranger who saw me not as his mother, but as a burden. Brenda placed her hand over mine. "You can't go back there, Elinor. You need to stay here for a while. My guest room's empty." I wanted to protest. Pride told me not to accept charity, but exhaustion silenced it. "Just for a few days." I murmured, of course. Brenda said gently, "As long as you need." That night, after she went to bed, I lay awake in the small guest room with the soft hum of crickets outside. I couldn't stop thinking about Lily, my sweet girl, trapped in that house with 2 people who were turning into monsters. The anger came slowly, creeping in through the cracks of grief. For the first time, it wasn't the kind of rage that makes you shout. It was cold, quiet, and deliberate, the kind that plans. I turned on the lamp and opened the folder I'd packed. The house deed, the will, the receipts. My name was still printed clearly on every page. Elinor Hart, sole owner of 14 Willow Drive. Legally, they had no right to throw me out. I traced my name with my finger and felt something stir in my chest. Not fear, not even sadness, something older. Sharper. Resolve. I would not disappear quietly. Tomorrow I would go to the courthouse, and I would start taking back what was mine. Morning came with the sound of rain tapping against the window. Brenda had already left for her job at the pharmacy, but she'd written a note on the kitchen counter. "There's cereal in the cupboard. Call me if you need a ride." I smiled faintly at her neat handwriting. Then I looked at the folder lying beside my teacup. The papers felt heavier than ever, as if they carried not just ink and signatures, but my entire life. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting on a bus heading downtown. The courthouse loomed gray and silent under the storm clouds, its steps slick with rain. I hadn't been there in years, not since Henry and I signed the will that promised our home would always stay in the family. He was gone now, but the promise remained. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper and old carpet. I clutched the folder like a lifeline and waited in line behind a dozen strangers, each carrying their own quiet desperation. When it was finally my turn, the clerk didn't even look up. "What are you here for?" she asked in a flat voice. "I need to verify ownership of a property." I said, "My house, my son and his wife, they've—" I hesitated, my throat tightening. "They've forced me out." That made her glance up. Her expression softened slightly when she saw my bruised cheek. "Do you have documentation?" I handed her the folder. She flipped through the pages, tapping her keyboard. After a long pause, she said, "Yes, it's still under your name, 14 Willow Drive, but if they're living there, you'll need to file a civil claim for wrongful possession, and that can take time." "How much time?" I asked. "Months. she said simply. Months outside, the rain had turned into a downpour. I stood under the courthouse awning, watching the water rush down the steps. The thought of Mark and Tina laughing in my kitchen while I stood here in the rain made my stomach twist. Still, I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I now had proof, legal proof, that the house was mine. I folded the papers carefully and tucked them into my bag. Across the street, a small diner glowed through the mist. I stepped inside, shivering, and found a booth by the window. A waitress with kind eyes poured me coffee without asking. "You look like you've had a morning," she said. I smiled faintly. "You could say that." As I sipped, I overheard two men at the counter talking about an estate lawyer named Tom Reynolds, who'd helped one of them handle a messy family dispute. The name stuck with me. After finishing my coffee, I asked the waitress for a phone book, something I hadn't used in years. Sure enough, his name was there, Reynolds and Parrish, attorneys at law. I dialed the number from the payphone outside. A cheerful secretary answered, and within minutes, I had an appointment for the next morning. That night, back at Brenda's, I wrote everything down in a small notebook. Dates, names, the words Tina had said, the slap, the deed confirmation. I knew memory fades when you need it most, so I wrote every detail like a confession. But what surprised me was how calm I felt. The fear was still there, yes, but underneath it was something new, a spark of control. Before going to sleep, I took out the photo of Henry again. "I'm not doing this for revenge," I whispered. "I'm doing it for peace." But deep down, I wasn't sure I believed that, because as I stared at the photo, I realized something chilling. Peace doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from balance. And I was ready to restore it. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside smelled of wet asphalt and magnolia blossoms. I wore my cleanest dress, a faded blue one Henry always liked, and took the bus downtown again, clutching my folder as if it contained my heartbeat. Tom Reynolds' office was on the second floor of an old red brick building near the courthouse. The sign outside was modest, painted in black letters, Reynolds and Parrish Estate and Family Law. Inside, it smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. The receptionist greeted me kindly and asked me to wait. I sat in the small lobby, my hands resting on the folder, eyes tracing the framed certificates on the wall: law school, civil mediation, property rights. When my name was called, I followed the young man who stepped out from behind a frosted glass door. He was in his late 30s, clean shaven, with gentle eyes and the kind of quiet confidence lawyers often fake, but his felt real. "Mrs. Hart, I'm Tom Reynolds. Please come in." I sat across from him, and before I could even begin, the tears I'd been holding for days finally broke free. "I'm sorry," I whispered, wiping my face. "I didn't mean to." He slid a box of tissues across the desk. "You don't have to apologize. Start wherever you need to." So I told him everything, about Mark, about Tina, about the years of small humiliations that grew into something cruel. The bruise on my wrist, the laughter as I packed my bag, the deed I'd kept safe all these years. When I finished, Tom leaned back, silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "You did the right thing coming here. Legally, that property is still yours. They have no right to evict you, especially not through intimidation or assault. But if I file a claim," I asked, "will I get the house back?" He hesitated, and my stomach sank. "It's complicated," he said carefully. "They've been paying utilities in their names for months. If they can prove you relinquished control, a judge might see it as an informal transfer. And if your son claims you're mentally unfit or unstable." My pulse stopped. "Mentally unfit," Tom nodded grimly. "It happens more often than you'd think. Adult children sometimes file competency petitions to gain control of their parents' property. If they're already living in your home and paying expenses, they might be preparing to do just that." I stared at him, stunned. "You mean Mark and Tina could be planning to take my house by claiming I'm insane?" He met my gaze. "It's possible. Have you signed any new documents in the last year? Anything they gave you?" I searched my memory, and then it hit me. 6 months ago, Tina had handed me a stack of papers to sign. It's just the new insurance forms. She'd said, I didn't even read them. I trusted my own son. Tom exhaled slowly. Bring those papers if you have copies. We'll review them. And until we know what they filed, don't contact them. Let me handle it. I nodded, numb, as I left his office. I caught my reflection in the glass door. The woman staring back looked tired, but different. Her eyes weren't full of sorrow anymore. They were sharp, calculating. When I returned to Brenda's, she was in the kitchen making soup. How'd it go? She asked. I told her everything, and she placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. If they're planning something that cruel, they'll regret it. You just wait. That night, I sat on Brenda's porch under the soft hum of streetlights, watching the shadows move across my old house across the street. Through the curtains, I saw Mark laughing with friends, Tina leaning on his arm. For a fleeting second, I imagined walking over, knocking on the door, and shouting, You can't erase me. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered to myself, They think I'm finished, let them. Because the best revenge isn't loud, it's patient, and I had patience. The next few days passed in a blur of waiting, paperwork, and sleepless nights. Brenda insisted I stay as long as I needed, and every morning she'd bring me coffee and say, You're doing the right thing, Elinor. But it didn't feel right. It felt like trying to climb out of a hole someone else kept digging deeper. Tom called me on Thursday afternoon. Mrs. Hart, he said, I found something. Can you come in tomorrow morning? His tone was serious, too serious. I barely slept that night. By dawn, I was already on the bus again, the folder clutched to my chest. When I walked into Tom's office, he had several sheets of paper spread across his desk. I pulled your property record from the county archives. He began, sliding a document toward me. You see this signature? I leaned closer. My name was printed neatly on the bottom of a form I didn't recognize. Transfer of joint ownership, dated 6 months ago. My blood ran cold. That's not my handwriting. I said, my voice shaking. Tom nodded. I didn't think so, but it's been notarized, which means someone presented ID claiming to be you. He flipped the next page. There it was again. My forged signature, giving Mark partial ownership of the house. I felt dizzy. How could they? Tina works at a real estate office, doesn't she? He asked. Yes, for years. Then it's possible she used her connections to file this quietly. I'll request the notary record. If we can prove forgery, we can have the transfer reversed. But it'll take time. Time. Everything came back to that word. Every path to justice seemed to move slower than pain. I left the office trembling, my thoughts spinning like the wind outside. They had forged my name, my own son and his wife, and used my trust as a weapon. On the way back to Brenda's, I stopped by a small thrift store. I bought a used notebook with a faded blue cover and started writing everything down. Every memory, every document, every cruel word Tina ever said. If I was going to fight this, I needed to be meticulous. That evening, Brenda found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. What are you doing, honey? Building a case, I said simply. She smiled softly. That's the Elinor I remember, the woman who ran her own sewing business out of a garage when everyone said she couldn't. I looked up. I used to think kindness was strength, but now I see it's boundaries that protect you. The next day, I walked to the neighborhood post office. The clerk, an older man I'd known for years, helped me file a certified complaint to the county fraud department. My hands didn't shake when I signed it this time. Later that afternoon, while I was watering Brenda's garden, a car pulled up in front of her house. Mark, he stepped out wearing sunglasses, his face tight with anger. Mom, he called out, What are you doing here? Tina said you've been spreading lies. Lies? I asked quietly. You know what I mean. You're trying to make us look bad. You signed that ownership form, remember. Don't start pretending. I didn't sign anything. I interrupted. My voice was calm, steady, almost frightening to him. And you know that. He hesitated. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear. You should go. I said, if you have anything to say, tell your lawyer. He stood there a moment longer, then turned and drove off. When he was gone, Brenda came out from behind the curtain, eyes wide. You handled that like a queen, she whispered. I smiled faintly. Queens lose battles all the time, Brenda, but they never forget who they are. That night, I sat alone by the window and made a promise to myself. If Tina thought she could forge my name and steal my life, she was about to learn something. She might know real estate, but I knew endurance, and endurance wins wars. 2 weeks passed before I heard anything back from the fraud department. Those were the longest 14 days of my life. Every morning I sat by Brenda's window with a cup of coffee, watching my house across the street. I saw Tina come and go in her crisp office clothes, and Mark pacing on the porch at night, talking on his phone. Sometimes I imagined what they were saying, how my name came up like a curse, how the calm woman they discarded had suddenly become a threat. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, a letter arrived. The envelope bore the county seal. My hands trembled as I opened it. Mrs. Eleanor Hart, we have received your complaint regarding alleged property forgery. An initial review of records confirms inconsistencies in notarization. An investigator will be assigned to your case within 7 business days. I read it twice, then a third time. Inconsistencies. That one word meant everything. It meant someone else had noticed what I already knew. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't senile. I was right. Brenda clapped her hands when I told her. "They're finally listening," she said. For the first time in months I allowed myself to smile, but victory never comes without consequence. That evening Mark showed up again. No sunglasses this time. Just stormy eyes and a jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. "Mom," he said, voice sharp, "we need to talk." "I don't think we do." He stepped closer. "Do you even know what you've done? You filed a fraud complaint against your own family." "I filed the truth," I said quietly. His voice rose. "Tina could lose her job. Do you understand that?" "I understand she forged my name," I said. "That's a crime, Mark." He looked away, hands shaking. "She didn't mean to hurt you. You thought I was old enough to ignore." I interrupted. He fell silent. For a moment I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be, the one who'd once built me a birdhouse out of scrap wood. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Mom," he said finally, "if this goes public, it'll ruin us." I met his eyes. "Then maybe you shouldn't have built your life on lies." He turned and walked away, slamming the gate behind him. I didn't watch him go. Later that night, while Brenda slept, I noticed the front door crack open slightly. On the porch lay an envelope. No address, no stamp, just my name written in hurried pen. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the forged form, the transfer of joint ownership. But this one had Tina's handwriting all over it. Notes, reminders, even a sticky tab labeled "Use alternate notary discreet." I stared at it, heart pounding. Who had left it there? The next morning I showed it to Tom. He examined it closely, eyes narrowing. This handwriting could connect her directly to the forgery. If we can find the original notary record, she's done. Then we find it, I said. Over the next few days, Tom contacted the county registrar, and the investigation deepened. Each step peeled back another layer of their deception. I learned that Tina had submitted the documents under her office's internal account, violating every rule of her profession. Meanwhile, Mark stopped coming around. Brenda said she'd seen him sleeping in his truck some nights, parked near the gas station. Tina, it seemed, had turned her anger on him too. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive as thunder. Sometimes it whispers, slowly, methodically, until the guilty start unraveling themselves. I didn't feel joy watching it happen, just a cold, steady satisfaction. When I told Brenda what was happening, she hugged me tight. "You're winning, Eleanor," she said. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was victory yet. "Winning," I whispered, "isn't just getting my house back. It's making sure they understand what they lost when they chose greed over love." That night I sat under the porch light, listening to the soft hum of summer insects, and whispered to the shadows. They thought I'd fade quietly, but I'm still here, and I remember everything. The morning the investigator came, The air felt unusually still, as if even the wind was waiting. His name was Daniel Price, a quiet man in his 50s with a badge clipped neatly to his shirt and a patient, deliberate way of speaking. He met me and Tom in the county records office, a thick file under his arm. "Mrs. Hart," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I've reviewed your complaint. You were right to come forward." Those words felt like a lifetime's worth of validation. Daniel opened the file, revealing photocopies, handwritten notes, and a printed email exchange between Tina and a notary. My name was all over it, misspelled once, corrected later, but always forged. She used her work credentials to access the filing system, Daniel explained. We traced her login timestamp to the day this transfer was processed. The notary in question has already admitted she never met you in person. That's fraud. I swallowed hard. What happens now? We'll refer it to the district attorney, but before that, since this involves your property, you can request an immediate injunction to remove their claim from the title. I've already prepared the paperwork. Tom smiled slightly. You're getting your house back, Mrs. Hart. For a moment I couldn't speak. All I could do was nod, feeling tears sting my eyes. That afternoon I walked out of the courthouse into bright, blinding sunlight. For the first time in months, the world didn't look gray anymore. When I got home to Brenda's, she was waiting on the porch, waving a newspaper. You haven't seen this, have you? The headline nearly stopped my heart. Local realtor under investigation for property fraud. There was Tina's picture, perfect smile, corporate headshot. Beneath a few damning paragraphs, the article didn't mention me by name, but everyone in the neighborhood would know. Brenda grinned. Looks like karma got her invitation. I didn't smile. Part of me wanted to, but another part, the tired, motherly part, just felt hollow. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Mark came back. No shouting this time, no sunglasses or swagger. He looked older, broken. "Mom," he said softly, standing at the edge of Brenda's yard, "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," I replied. He rubbed his hands together, eyes red. "I didn't know she did that. I swear I didn't. I thought you'd signed everything willingly. She told me it was just paperwork to make things easier if something happened to you." I looked at him carefully. "And you didn't think to ask me?" He opened his mouth, then shut it again. I wanted to believe her. I let the silence stretch between us, the distance of 1,000 small betrayals. Finally I said, "Mark, I spent my life protecting you from bills, from grief, from the world, but I won't protect you from the truth." He nodded slowly, tears forming. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I know," I said. "But apologies don't fix trust. Only actions do." He hesitated, then whispered, "She's leaving town. They suspended her license. She's gone for good." A long breath escaped me. The wind rustled through the magnolia tree, scattering petals across the grass like soft confetti. "Maybe that's for the best," I said quietly. When he left, I sat on Brenda's porch alone, watching my house across the street. The windows glowed warm again, but it wasn't the same. It was empty now, waiting. Tom called the next day. "It's official," he said. "The injunction passed. The title's back in your name. You can return whenever you're ready." Whenever I'm ready. That night I packed my bag slowly, folding each blouse with care. Brenda hugged me tight before I left. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said, smiling faintly. I just remembered who I was. As I crossed the street and stepped onto my porch, the air felt lighter, cleaner. The house creaked like it was breathing again, welcoming me home. Inside, dust danced in the golden light from the window. I walked to the living room, placed Henry's photo back on the mantel, and whispered, "We made it back." For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. Only free. The house didn't feel like mine at first. Even with the title restored, the papers signed, and Tina gone, the silence inside carried her shadow. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the hallways, a cold, synthetic sweetness that made my stomach tighten. I opened every window that day. The air flowed through, cool and sharp, brushing against curtains that hadn't moved freely in months. Piece by piece, I reclaimed what was mine. I pulled down the new curtains Tina had chosen, bright and soulless, and hung my old lace ones again. I took her glossy framed quotes off the wall, Leave boldly, Own your power, and replaced them with my own photographs, Henry by the lake, Mark as a child, Lily's first piano recital. Each small act felt like stitching a wound closed. The neighborhood changed, too. People who'd once gossiped from behind their fences now stopped by in quiet apology. We didn't know. They'd say, eyes full of guilt. I didn't hold it against them. They hadn't seen the rot beneath the paint. By the end of the first week, the house began to breathe again. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was from Lily. I hadn't heard from her since the fallout. Her handwriting was still neat and looping, but the ink trembled slightly in places. Dear Grandma, I heard what happened. I'm sorry. Mom told me your side, but now I know there's more. I've been thinking about the summers we spent baking cookies, you teaching me how to braid your garden roses, and how safe I always felt at your house. I miss that. I miss you. Love, Lily. I read it twice before setting it down, my throat tight. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sunset pour gold through the leaves. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't scare me. It soothed me. A knock broke the stillness. When I opened the door, Tom stood there holding a small potted plant. Thought this might look nice in your window, he said, smiling awkwardly. Tom, you didn't have to, I know, he said. But I wanted to. I placed the plant on the sill, tiny white jasmine flowers already opening. Their scent filled the room, clean and sweet. We sat in the kitchen afterward, talking about simple things. The garden, the new bakery downtown, his mother's stubborn cat. No mention of the investigation or the fraud, just normal life. As he left, he turned to me and said, You know, Mrs. Hart, you're stronger than anyone I've ever met. I smiled softly. Strength isn't something you choose, Tom. Sometimes it just shows up, when everything else leaves. That night I wrote back to Lily. My dearest Lily, there's nothing you could say that I wouldn't forgive. I miss you too. The garden's still blooming, and your piano's waiting in the corner, dust and all. When you're ready, come home. There will always be tea on the table. I sealed the letter with trembling fingers and placed it by the door to mail the next morning. As I looked around my living room, its familiar corners, its scars and creaks, I realized something quietly beautiful. I didn't need to start over. I just needed to start again. Not everything could be fixed. But some things could still be grown. The jasmine by the window swayed gently in the breeze. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. Spring arrived early that year. The magnolia tree out front bloomed in soft pink clouds, its petals drifting down like warm snow. The house was brighter now, curtains open, windows clean, sunlight spilling across the wooden floors. I spent mornings in the garden again, pruning roses and humming the same tune Henry used to whistle. The soil was cool beneath my hands, alive. Every day felt like a quiet apology from the world. One morning, as I was trimming the jasmine Tom had given me, I heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel. A silver car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and there she was, Lily. She stood there hesitantly, taller now, her dark hair tied back in a loose braid. For a moment neither of us moved. Then, without a word, she ran toward me. I dropped my gloves and caught her in my arms. She smelled like rain and vanilla shampoo. I'm sorry, Grandma, she whispered into my shoulder. I held her tighter. There's nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart. You're home. We stood like that for a long time, just breathing each other in. Inside, the house seemed to welcome her too. The piano sat quietly in the corner, a fine layer of dust on its keys. She brushed it with her fingertips, smiling. You kept it. She said softly, of course. I replied, It's waiting for you. She sat down and played a few notes, hesitant at first, then surer, fuller. The melody filled the room, weaving through sunlight and memory. I felt my eyes sting. Later that afternoon, while Lily explored the garden, I made lunch. The doorbell rang just as I set the table. It was Mark. He looked different, less polished, more human. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something like humility. Lily told me she was visiting. He said, voice quiet, I thought maybe I could come too. I nodded, stepping aside. Of course, come in. He looked around the house like he was seeing it for the first time. You fixed it up nice. He murmured, I didn't fix it. I said, I just brought it back to life. We sat at the kitchen table in a silence that felt both heavy and gentle. Finally he spoke. I wanted to say thank you. He said, for not pressing charges, for not hating me. I wanted to, I admitted, but hate takes too much space in the heart, and I don't have room for it any more. He nodded, eyes wet. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not. I said softly, but forgiveness isn't earned, Mark. It's given. He looked down at his hands. I'm trying to be better, for Lily. That's all that matters, I said. Lily came in then, laughing, holding a single rose she'd picked from the garden. She placed it in a small glass on the table. It's perfect, she said, and for a fleeting moment it was. The three of us ate together. Simple food, quiet talk, no anger left to burn. The clock ticked softly in the background, marking time that finally felt kind. When they left later that evening, I stood on the porch, watching their car fade down the road. The sky was streaked with orange and violet, the kind of color that never stays long but leaves its memory behind. I turned back toward my house. The jasmine by the window had started to bloom again, its scent drifting through the open door. I sat in my favorite chair, a cup of tea warming my hands, and looked around at everything I'd almost lost, and somehow found again. Henry's photo smiled down from the mantel. I did it. I whispered. The floor creaked softly, like the house was answering, and for the first time in years I truly felt it, not fear, not anger, not even relief, but peace. By autumn, the neighborhood no longer whispered about the scandal. The house on Willow Lane, once the center of gossip, had become something else entirely. A story people told in low, admiring tones about a woman who refused to break. Children passed by on bicycles, waving at the elderly lady tending her roses. Sometimes she waved back, sometimes she just smiled to herself, humming a tune only she seemed to remember. Her heart had grown lighter somehow, not smaller, but freer. Her days had settled into a rhythm she hadn't realized she'd missed, morning coffee on the porch, pruning the magnolias, writing letters she never needed to send. Once a week, Tom would stop by with a new plant or a basket of groceries. Sometimes Lily came too, bringing her laughter and the soft echo of piano music. The old house seemed to hum when she played, like it recognized her touch. Mark visited less often, but always stayed longer. He fixed the mailbox, repainted the shutters, replaced the loose fence post, not out of guilt, but out of quiet love, the kind that asks for nothing. The town eventually forgot the messy details, the forged signatures, the investigation, the betrayal. But they remembered the image that mattered: an old woman standing on her porch one morning, watching the sunrise, her shoulders straight, her eyes unafraid. People said she'd lost everything once. But those who really knew her understood. She had found everything she needed right where she started. Sometimes, at dusk, she'd light the old porch lamp Henry had installed decades ago. The glow would spill softly across the steps, a beacon for anyone who'd ever been lost and needed a way home. And if you walked by on those evenings, you might hear the faint sound of piano keys drifting through an open window, Lily playing something slow and sweet, Elinor humming along, and the old house breathing easy again, alive with the sound of forgiveness. Because in the end, it wasn't about the house at all. It was about coming home to herself.